What if I told you that one of the most important inventions in human history was a mistake, an accident, and that for over 300,000 years of modern human existence, we did everything without it? We built monuments that defy imagination. We established sprawling cities. We created art that still speaks to us across millennia. All of this in a world without the wheel. The story of the wheel isn't about the first cart. It's not even about transportation. The real story is far more surprising, and it begins not on a road, but with a lump of wet clay. Today, on Origin Stories, we're going back to the beginning to uncover how a simple circle, born from a completely different purpose, put humanity on a new path and rolled us into the modern world. To truly understand how revolutionary the wheel was, we first have to imagine a world without it. Let's travel back to the Neolithic period, around 10,000 to 4,000 BC. This was the age of the agricultural revolution. We had learned to cultivate crops, domesticate animals, and build permanent settlements. Life was a marvel of ingenuity, but it was defined by one constant, inescapable force: friction. Everything heavy had to be dragged, pushed, or carried. Moving a large stone, a haul of timber, or a harvest of grain was a monumental task, requiring immense collective effort. Can you imagine the sheer manpower needed? The primary mode of heavy transport was the sledge, a simple platform dragged along the ground. On good terrain, like mud or snow, it worked reasonably well. But on rough, dry earth, it was a brutal, back-breaking struggle. And yet, look at what we achieved. Long before the first wheel ever turned, our ancestors were quarrying, transporting, and erecting multi-ton stones to create structures that still baffle us today. At Göbekli Tepe, dating back over 11,000 years, massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing up to 50 tons, were moved and arranged into complex circles. How did they do it? Have you ever wondered? Archaeological evidence and experimental history suggest a combination of brute force, social organization, and a clever understanding of physics. They used sledges, levers, and perhaps most importantly, rollers. By placing a heavy object on a sledge and rolling it over a path of logs, they could significantly reduce friction. This was a brilliant solution, but it had a major flaw. The rollers themselves had to be constantly picked up from behind and moved to the front. It was effective, but incredibly inefficient. So, the concept of rolling was there, but the idea of a wheel was still millennia away. Why? The leap from a simple roller to a wheel isn't as obvious as it seems. A roller moves with the object. A wheel, however, needs to rotate around something that stays fixed. And that something is the axle. This is the true mechanical genius of the wheel and axle concept. The wheel must be perfectly round, the hole must be perfectly centered, and the axle must be smooth and just the right size. Not too tight to jam, not too loose to wobble. Creating this precise combination with Neolithic tools was an extraordinary engineering challenge. For thousands of years, the brightest minds saw logs rolling, but no one made the connection to a fixed axle. The solution to friction was right in front of them, yet completely hidden. A different problem needed to be solved first, one that had nothing to do with moving things from place to place. Our story now takes us to Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, in what is modern-day Iraq. Around 3500 BC, this region was a hotbed of innovation. Writing, agriculture, and cities were flourishing. And it's here, in the hands of a craftsman, that our invention finally appears. Before the wheel, making pottery was a slow process. Pots were built by hand, coiling ropes of clay and smoothing them together. It worked, but each vessel was unique, time-consuming to create, and difficult to make perfectly symmetrical. As cities grew, the demand for storage jars, bowls, and cups exploded. Potters needed a way to work faster. They needed to innovate. The first step was the tournette, or slow wheel. It was essentially a turntable. A potter could place their work on this rotating surface, allowing them to shape it evenly without having to walk around it. This was a major improvement, but the real breakthrough came when they figured out how to make the wheel spin continuously and fast. By adding a flywheel at the bottom that could be kicked, the potter's hands were freed. Now, centrifugal force did most of the work. A lump of clay could be centered, pulled upwards, and shaped into a perfectly symmetrical vessel in a fraction of the time. This is the true birth of the wheel. This is the first verified archaeological evidence we have of the wheel and axle principle in action. Not for a cart, not for a chariot, but to mass-produce pottery. Isn't that incredible? The invention that would move armies and build empires began its life helping someone make a better bowl. So, how did we get from a potter's wheel to a wagon? For a long time, we didn't. The potter's wheel existed for perhaps 300 years before anyone thought to tip it on its side and use it for transport. Why did it take so long? Is it really as simple as it seems? The conceptual leap required someone to look at a tool designed for shaping clay and see a solution for moving heavy loads. It required someone to solve the friction problem, not just on the ground, but at the very center of the wheel itself, the hub. This transition likely happened gradually. Perhaps someone used a small roller with grooves that kept it in place. Then they refined it. The earliest evidence for wheeled vehicles appears almost simultaneously, around 3200 BC, in Mesopotamia, the North Caucasus, and Central Europe. It seems, once the idea was sparked, it spread like wildfire. The arrival of the first wheeled vehicle must have been a spectacle. It was probably loud, slow, and incredibly bumpy. But it was revolutionary. Suddenly, a single farmer with a pair of oxen could transport a load that previously would have required 10 people. Some of our earliest evidence is beautifully indirect. The Braniczyce pot, discovered in Poland, features the oldest known depiction of a wheeled vehicle. This tells us that within a few centuries of the potter's wheel, the idea of the cart had already traveled thousands of kilometers from its Mesopotamian origin, or perhaps was even developed independently. And then we have the real thing. Discovered in a marsh in Slovenia in 2002, the Ljubljana Marshes wheel has been dated to be over 5,200 years old. It's a solid wooden disc crafted with surprising precision. This is the oldest actual wheel ever found. Holding a picture of it, you're looking at the genesis of every car, train, and airplane that would ever exist. These first wheels were solid discs, often made from 3 planks of wood clamped together. They were heavy and best suited for flat, open terrain, like the plains of Mesopotamia or the Eurasian steppe.
But on this step, the wheel wasn't just going to change farming. It was about to become an instrument of power.
Around 2000 BC, a new culture emerged on the steppe, the Sintashta people. They were skilled metallurgists and horse breeders, and they perfected a deadly new technology, the spoked wheel. By replacing the solid disc with a light rim, a hub, and thin spokes under tension, they created a wheel that was incredibly strong, yet astonishingly light. This wasn't just an improvement, it was a complete reinvention. The spoked wheel allowed for the creation of the war chariot. The chariot was the superweapon of the Bronze Age. A fast, mobile platform for an archer, it could outmaneuver infantry, shatter enemy formations, and create chaos. Empires like the Egyptians, the Hittites, and the Mycenaean Greeks rose and fell on the strength of their chariot armies. The wheel was no longer just a tool for a farmer. It was a status symbol for a king and a weapon for a conqueror. It created a new warrior aristocracy and changed the very nature of social hierarchy. Through trade, migration, and conquest, the wheel rolled across the ancient world. It reached the Indus Valley by 3000 BC and China by around 1200 BC, where they too developed chariots. In Europe, Celtic peoples became masterful wheelwrights, developing iron rims that made their wheels more durable. The Romans, of course, were master engineers. They used wheeled carts and wagons on their famous stone-paved roads to supply their legions and administer their vast empire. The wheel had conquered the old world. But across the great oceans, entire continents of people were living, thriving, and building empires of their own, completely without it. Why? This is one of the most fascinating puzzles in the history of technology. For thousands of years, the great civilizations of the Americas, the Olmec, Maya, Aztec, and Inca, flourished. They built monumental cities, developed complex calendars, and created incredible art. But for transport and construction, they never used the wheel. Now, here's a little-known fact that makes this even more confusing. They knew the principle of the wheel. Archaeologists have found numerous examples of these, wheeled toys for children. This proves they understood the mechanics of the wheel and axle. They had the idea. So why didn't they scale it up for carts and wagons? The answer tells us a crucial lesson about invention. An idea is not enough. You need the right conditions. First, look at the terrain. The dense jungles and towering mountains of Central and South America were simply not suitable for wheeled vehicles. An extensive road network would have been immensely difficult to build and maintain. Second, and most importantly, they lacked large draft animals. In Eurasia, the wheel co-evolved with domesticated horses, oxen, and donkeys. Without these powerful beasts to pull a heavy cart, the wheel's advantage is drastically reduced. The llama is a fantastic pack animal, but it can't pull a plow or a wagon. So, for the Inca, it was simply more efficient to use llama caravans and a sophisticated system of paved footpaths. A similar story unfolded in sub-Saharan Africa. While wheels were used in the north, in Egypt and Nubia, they didn't spread further south for a long time. Again, environmental factors played a huge role. The presence of the tsetse fly in many regions made it impossible to use cattle or horses for transport, as the fly carries a deadly disease for these animals. Waterways and human porters remained the most reliable methods of transport. So, the absence of the wheel in these cultures wasn't a sign of being less advanced.
It was a sign of being perfectly adapted to their own environments. It shows that technology doesn't develop in a vacuum. It's a response to specific needs, and it depends on a whole ecosystem of other factors: geography, biology, and culture. The wheel was a brilliant solution, but only for a specific set of problems.
Back in Eurasia, the wheel was entering a new phase of its life. It was moving beyond transportation and becoming the heart of a new kind of technology: the machine. The ancient Greeks were obsessed with geometry and mechanics. They took the simple wheel and transformed it into the gear. By adding teeth, they could transfer motion, change direction, and alter speed and torque with incredible precision. This was the birth of complex machinery, leading to incredible devices like the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient astronomical computer. The Romans, being practical engineers, put the wheel to work on an industrial scale. They built massive water wheels to grind grain for their cities and power their mines, creating the first real factories in history. The wheel was no longer just moving things horizontally. It was lifting water vertically and turning raw materials into finished products. The wheel continued its quiet revolution through the Middle Ages. The spinning wheel transformed textile production. The wheelbarrow, a simple but brilliant invention, likely from China, allowed a single person to move loads that previously required two. The wheel even became a powerful symbol in art and philosophy. The rota fortuna, or wheel of fortune, representing the unpredictable nature of fate, and the Dharma chakra in Buddhism, symbolizing the path to enlightenment. It had rolled its way into our very souls.
And then came the Industrial Revolution. It was here that the wheel truly became the engine of modernity. The steam engine's piston moved back and forth, but it was the conversion of that linear motion into rotary motion via a crankshaft and flywheel that unleashed its power. Suddenly, wheels were everywhere, driving the looms of textile mills, powering the first locomotives, turning the propellers of ships and airplanes. The 20th century was the century of the wheel. The automobile reshaped our cities and our lives. From the tiny gears in a wristwatch to the giant turbines in a power plant, our entire technological civilization was, and still is, built on the foundation of that simple wheel and axle principle, first conceived by a potter 5,500 years ago.
The story of the wheel is the story of humanity. It begins with a basic need, creating a vessel to hold food or water. It evolves through a spark of insight, a moment of connection where a tool for one purpose is reimagined for another. It becomes a catalyst for trade, a weapon of war, a symbol of faith, and the engine of industry. It reminds us that the greatest changes often come from the simplest ideas, and that even now, as we explore new worlds, we are still carried forward by that same ancient circular motion. The wheel didn't just change the world. In many ways, it created the world we know. Its journey is our journey. A continuous, spinning, ever-evolving story of human ingenuity. Why does this matter to us today? Because in our complex world, we sometimes forget the power of fundamental ideas. The story of the wheel teaches us that the next world-changing invention might not look like a revolution.
It might be a simple tool waiting in plain sight for someone to look at it and see a different possibility.
Thank you so much for joining us on Origin Stories. What other simple invention do you think has a surprisingly deep and fascinating history? Let us know in the comments below. We love reading your ideas and starting a conversation. And if you enjoyed this journey back in time, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us continue to tell these stories. We'll see you next time. Stay curious.